UX Podcast is funded by me and Per, together with contributions we get from you, our listeners. Help support UX Podcast and the UX community by contributing financially to keep the show running. Visit uxpodcast.com/support and contribute as much as you can.
UX Podcast episode 236.
Hello, I'm Per Axbom.
And I'm James Royal Lawson.
And this is UX Podcast. We're in Stockholm, Sweden, and you're listening in 194 countries all over the world, from Slovakia to Nicaragua.
It's been a while since we mentioned the weather, Per, but I think this is the first time I can remember that I've recorded this podcast in a thunderstorm.
Right. Fair mentioning it.
Yeah, and I can hear it, and when it thunders, I definitely can hear it. So this is one of those podcasts now where we're going to have some like atmospheric sound possibly in the background, at least my microphone.
And today we have for you a link show. And a link show is where we have two articles lined up to talk about that we found during our digital travels. The first one coming up is Why Designisms Are a Problem.
And this one is by Josh Munn, who is an experienced designer based in New Zealand and has spent the best part of his design career working in healthcare environments.
And our second article for you today is How to Write Compelling User Research Insights in 6 Steps.
And this one is by Nikki Anderson, who is product therapist on Twitter, and she is a user researcher based in Berlin, in Germany.
So I know you have a bit of a backstory to how you found the first article, James.
Yeah, well, basically the first thing I came to contact with in connection to this article was a poster. A poster about people and listing a number of roles within our design work. And defining what they are and what they kind of really mean. So UX designer, UI designer, service designer, front-end dev, back-end dev, end users. And I really like this poster. It appealed to me and appealed to the kind of like side of me that likes the plain speaking use of language. And I backed up and realised this was one of a set of 3 posters. And when I realised that was one of a set of 3 of posters, I then saw that in itself was a follow-up article to another article talking about designisms, or the jargon and the complicated language we actually use. So I backed up 3 steps from what I found to actually what we're featuring as an article today.
I like this one because I have sections I agree with and I have sections I disagree with.
Interesting.
First off, what is a designism?
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll start off by reading the first little bit of the article. So, Josh, he opens up by just writing or describing a general conversation that he says he has almost every other week, and he says it goes something like this. So, hey, so what do you do for a living?
I'm a UX designer.
What's a UX designer?
UX stands for user experience.
Deathly radio silence.
I basically design apps and websites for a living.
Oh, so you know how to code and stuff?
No, I can't code. I kind of do everything up to that point. You know, like the look and feel of the app, what you see, how it works. I work with developers, though.
Oh, so what do you actually do? So, I mean, all of us recognise that conversation. I mean, we've all had it, probably regularly as this as well, and if not with people in our own branch, with relatives, with your mother, with friends, it does happen an awful lot, because what we do, when you describe it as say, a UX designer, doesn't really say very much.
And I think we have talked a lot about this on the show as well. We've sort of almost grown tired on UX podcast with the term UX, because it's not self-explanatory in any way, but it is a term that we can throw around to find our tribes. So you're in UX, I'm in UX, and that's how sort of we find people who are of the same mindset as ourselves, even though we may not know if we work with exactly the same things, we know that we have sort of the same types of goals with helping users. With digital services often.
Yeah, so we have discussed that before, how UX is used almost as a kind of a signalling element within our industry to say, hey, look, I'm one of your tribe. But as far as the overall user experience of the phrase user experience, it's really badly designed from a user experience point of view. It doesn't really cater for other groups of people who might come into contact with it. So Josh, though, he's focused. He isn't really kind of bitching mainly about UX as a phrase. It's actually a bit broader than that. He's talking about design jargon, design phrases and things that we use and we throw around in our work and what we produce that aren't necessarily easy for people that we work with or stakeholders or users of the products we design can understand. And Josh would like us to develop alternatives and to try and put an active effort into using those alternatives instead of the convoluted phrases that we have adopted.
And he describes how the background to how he came upon this, really as seeing it as a growing problem, was when he was at a conference and someone started talking about not only UX but also CX and BX and PX, and people just love playing around with that term because it's sexy in some way. I mean, it's short, it has the X letter, and so that's fantastic. It's not only it's customer experience, and I don't even know what the other two are. Product experience is PX probably.
Business experience, maybe? I don't know what the BX one is.
Must be.
And
that really doesn't help us at all. It just creates more confusion, so that's going in completely the wrong direction. So what he's saying here is let's go the other direction and move away as far away as possible from these terms, and try to be as explanatory as possible, use simple terminology, give background to the terminology, and really not use it at all. And here's maybe where I disagree with some parts of it. He's even saying that we should not be using it with our peers, with the people that we work with. And I think I understand where he's going with that, because not using it with our peers helps us to always use the user-friendly way of explaining things. But on the other hand, it's when you work within an industry, within a profession, having the same terminology as a shortcut for talking about things. I mean, it's true for all different types of industries. And I think that can be really helpful in itself. So I'm not sure that you should always avoid it, but you should always be concerned about, is the person I'm talking to understanding me? And how can I become better at describing the work I do and the value I bring, really?
Yeah, because I mean, this is I guess the essence of communication. That all communication is trying to do is reduce the amount of guessing the other party is performing in order to understand what you're going on about. And by using simpler language, we're reducing the complexity. We're increasing the chance that we can communicate in a way that's understood.
Right.
And exactly what you say, and I agree with you that sometimes it's going to be correct to say personas or MVP. But in other situations, no one is going to have any understanding what MVP means, or they're not going to have the same understanding as you, even though they understand the phrase.
Exactly.
MVP is actually a good example of that. I mean, this almost everyone's got their own definition of what MVP means.
That is a good example. And in fact, in the project I'm working in now, I'm just starting up a new project. We're taking time and putting effort into putting together a glossary of terminology, because even the simplest of terms, people do not agree about what they mean. So that's why we make sure that we make a list of these terms, so that whenever we use it, especially in documentation, we know what we mean. And I mean, I think that's a recommendation for most projects. That's something to do. We're not specifically in this project doing it for UX terminology, but for healthcare terminology. But it's the same principle, I think.
Well, I think that's a principle that any team would need to work on. We've discussed that before as well. When you've got to have a shared vocabulary within your team, or design system, or whatever it is you're working on to make sure that everyone around you is on the same page when it comes to the phrases you're using. And then everyone at the other side of any communicating edge you have also is on the same page as whatever language you're using outwards from your group, your tribe, your team.
Exactly. And one thing I might feel like I'm missing from the article, perhaps, is this opportunity for actually listening more to people. So I agree with that we shouldn't treat people like toddlers and explain it like basic, but we can also have the opportunity of asking people, what do you think this means? And start learning about what do different words mean for different people. Because then it turns into a conversation instead of me just trying to explain something to you without also constantly checking, do you understand what I'm saying? Because even in some of the examples he's using to simplify, there are still words and phrases, like even the word interface. I know a lot of people don't understand that word. So with different people, we have to use different levels of simplification as well.
Yeah, in that sense, it's like peeling an onion, isn't it, I guess?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, one of the examples here was mood board. And then, that's a phrase that maybe a lot of people don't understand what it is. And then describing that as a collage of images, fonts, interactions, and icons, you might need to even explain what a lot of those phrases mean. Interactions. What's an interaction? So you'd have to then sense and respond. Kind of feel, how does the person respond to that? They understand the language. Okay, I need to peel another layer off the onion and go one step simpler. But if you've already prepared, the onion, that you've already kind of come to an agreement about not just kind of what's the high level convoluted phrase that we're going to use within our little clique. How do we describe that to people who have a little bit of understanding of the sphere of work that we're working within, and then how do you describe that to people who have absolutely no idea?
Exactly.
But if you've gone through those different layers in advance, then it really helps you, I guess, present a united front towards who you're communicating to.
And I think this really is a call to action. That's what I really like about it, and what I take away from it is that it actually encourages people and teams to make this effort, and that's what the posters are for. You put them up in the office, you remind yourself that we can't always talk like we're talking right now. We need to find other ways of explaining the work we do. Yeah,
and that's an excellent point, Peter, just where I started, by seeing the posters.
Yes, exactly.
I was really attracted by the fact that, as I said in the beginning of the podcast, that the first poster I saw was one that said people. So keep it simple, stop using designisms. And then people, it listed these roles and tried to describe them in a more simple way. Now, the other two posters in this set of three are things and methods. So methods are like personas, A/B testing, agile, and so on, MVP.
Right.
And things are, I guess, I'm going to use one myself now, deliverables. Mood board, service design blueprint, wireframes, prototype.
Right, yeah.
But if we ignore the content of the posters with the things that are listed, but just keep it to those high level titles of methods, things, and people, that's a really good starting point for these discussions. And like you're saying about building up a vocabulary, or at least just doing a stock take of what you've got and working out how you can describe these phrases you use in different levels of complexity.
Exactly.
Because I'm looking at this list, I mean, there's only 6 on each poster. I mean, we all know there's a lot more than 6 within each of these categories in our design world. Yeah, you could add a 0 or 2 to some of these, and you probably still wouldn't run out of phrases. But as buckets of types of phrases, then I think it's a really good starting point.
All right, let's move on to the next article. So this one is titled "How to Write Compelling User Research Insights in 6 Steps." And it's written by Nikki Anderson, and it really ties into what we were just talking about with words and what they mean, because what Nikki has realized is that just the word insight. We talk about this thing all the time. We do some research, and people go back at the office. Oh, what insights did you get? Oh, we learned this and this and this. And we haven't really decided how to express insights to make them valuable, which I find really funny. So what she starts out with is that she's realized, well, all the user research in the world doesn't matter if you don't produce insights that organizations can use. So in essence, an insight has to be something that the organization can use, of course. And it has to be based on research that a team can use to make better decisions. We know this. That's the generic definition of a user research insight. But then she goes on to also explain, well, that's is necessarily wrong, but it puts the idea of an insight into a really small box. And the difference is how do we make insights be user-centric instead of product-focused? How do we make sure that what we communicate about what we learned, how do we communicate that in a way so we understand that it's a human being having a special need or demonstrating a special certain behavior? And of course, she's throughout the article always stressing that there are no insights if we actually don't do the research. We have to have conversations with users to actually get any insights. It's not, we can't sit around at a meeting in the office with our colleagues and have insights about users. That's just not the way it happens. Insights come from talking and engaging with users themselves. And so she goes on through some things that are not insights, listing an observation. An observation is interesting. You can observe a user doing something that may be interesting, but the observation by itself is not an insight because it doesn't tell us why they're acting in a certain way, why they're performing what you're observing them doing. Which ties.
That's what I was waiting for. Is like, okay, if what is that little added little sprinkling of fairy dust that makes the observation into an insight?
And this, like you and I always talk about when we talk about quantitative data, it's really interesting to see that we have this bounce rate, but always when they come to this page, they leave. But that's not the insight. The insight is why they leave. So we have to dig deeper.
Ooh, you say, it was fascinating. Sorry, I'm breaking into the middle of your experience. But what I'm actually working on today is an analytics report where I need to deliver a lot of insights based on quantitative data. And it's fascinating to see that, okay, they're not insights unless we do actually have real user contact. I'm not going to have that in this bit of work I'm doing. I'm just looking at the data. But I'd argue that there are some insights that I can come to by looking at a combination of things that are there in the data. I mean, okay, it'd be nice to validate them even more by talking to them. But certain things you can see, a certain type of behavior is evident from the data, and you can even.
But then you're saying evidence as well.
You can evident and infer why they're doing it.
Yes, which takes me on to this point, because this is when that I really actually I did a double take and I realized, well, I don't have to. We don't have to say that she's right in every aspect of the article, but I do take to heart everything she is saying in the article, and when she's explaining this about the difference between a finding and an insight, that's when I realized a lot of the stuff that I'm calling insights are just findings, because something with a short shelf life is her point. Insights tend to have an impact over a few months or even years, and they can influence the future product strategy. But if you have something, information about something you want to solve today, that you see people making mistakes in a checkout form or checkout process, that's just a finding, and you fix that. That's not an insight. It's just something you realize. It's almost like a bug. Okay, so we see that's a problem, and so we fix it. That's a finding.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I can get that. Yeah, with findings. Yeah, because you're looking at you're looking more within what's going on and seeing something you can tweak within it.
Exactly. So the findings are still really important, but they're not insights. And also back to, of course, the point that we always make when we do user research, just because people tell you that they have a preference or they like something, that's, of course, also not an insight. You have to dig deeper into the root cause of that preference, of course. So she sort of goes into really identifying things that I would probably in many projects have called insights, but if we are to declare an insight and finding insight as something useful to the project and to the organization, we probably should agree, like we were talking about in the previous article, agree about what an insight is.
What an insight is, what a finding is.
Yes, exactly.
And all these other variations of
Yeah.
things that are very close to each other.
Mm.
Yeah, interesting.
What she's saying here is they're breaking it down into, so it has to be a discovery about human behavior that gives you new understanding. It's information that challenges what we believe, so maybe it perhaps negates or changes the way that we've viewed users in the past. Or it's knowledge that reveals fundamental principles that drive us towards seeing users in a new way. So understanding the user's mental models on how something should work. So it's always coming back to the user and how they're behaving and how they're thinking. The thinking behind their behavior, really. Why they're doing stuff. Those are the really interesting insights that you can use to design things that are sustainable across a longer period of time. So it's not just about finding stuff to fix. It's not like doing a usability test. In a usability test, you often have findings, but in research, you have insights, is what I'm sort of taking away as well.
Well, one thing I really like from what she's written, and something I try to bake into my work, even if I am doing insights that maybe aren't really insights sometimes, is this whole thing about recommending the next steps.
Yeah.
It's really valuable that, and for me it helps even. Helps you in the situations where sometimes you can't give a concrete next step. I can't say fix that, do that, design, do this design or change or so on. Sometimes the next step is more research, for example. Quite commonly, I'll recommend more research, and this is I deal a lot in quantitative analysis and analytics, and I need the qualitative research to go on top of that sometimes. I can't say why. And to help me communicate that, then I will recommend, and I'll maybe even recommend a type of qualitative research to do to help you understand the why behind what I've seen.
Exactly. Yes. And then she goes on to have a specific structure, and that's the number 6 from the title of the article is the 6 steps to actually explaining an insight. And without using her example, I was going to try and see. I had an experience earlier today because I'm looking to buy a printer, like one of these that you can scan with and print with, obviously, and copy with. So
what do you mean buying a printer that doesn't print? You're
printer.
So old-fashioned.
And it has to have an ADF, an automatic document feeder. So I did some research and realized that this is probably the printer I want. And I found a really good price for it on a website. And I went to the website and it says, well, we don't have any in stock, but we think we may have one ready for delivery in 2 days. So there's a chat button. I click the chat button and I go, so I see that this printer is maybe being able to be delivered in 2 days. Can you give me more information? Because that's just 2 days away. And oh no, I have no information. Okay, thanks. And as soon as I said, okay, thanks, he closed the chat, which was hugely interesting to me because I was expecting, is there anything else I could help you with? Is there any other product that you're interested in? What you would expect from a salesperson. And I realized that from this, I realized that I actually was interested in buying from this company. And if he had asked me about, so what is it that you were looking into, and why I was looking for that printer, he could probably have sold me another printer with similar specs. And that's a finding. That I wasn't satisfied with the service, and that he could probably have sold me something. But the insight is, just because you don't have the product I want doesn't mean I don't want to buy from you. And if you express that as an insight, I mean, that opens a whole plethora of different things you can do to actually introduce other products to people, even if they're not finding the product that they want.
Or spin off other research questions from that, because just that fact that insight that you said there isn't the end of the story.
I mean, yes, exactly. You can always
how you how are you receptive to what type of messaging are you receptive to? What kind of things are you open to? I mean, if someone's too pushy and too salesy, you're going to be backing off, and you're not going to be interested. So there's so many more aspects to spin off from that, which is fascinating.
So always go for the behavior and not just what the action or what's happening. The root cause is what we're after.
Yeah, root cause, motivation, communicating the consequences.
And what he's also encouraging here, of course, when you're doing these 6 steps and how you want to explain the insight, is that you express it in the first-person voice of someone using the product or service, which makes it feel more personal. This works well with some people and not always with other people. I think the way you present something always also has to be within the context of how you're presenting it to. Are you presenting it to a design team? Are you presenting it to developers? Are you presenting it to managers? I think that will also have an effect on how you choose to present it as well. I think designers really like the way that you present this. So often if you are doing user research and handing it over to designers, I think this would work really well. But I do like how both these articles remind us of how easy it is to throw around words all the time, expecting others to have the same interpretation of them as ourselves. And even the words that we are sure that we actually do have in common, like I'm sure that you and I could yesterday have had a conversation about insights and been in complete agreement about what we mean. But then we find a third person who disagrees, and we realize, I'm willing to change some of my perception of what an insight is. Absolutely. So always be able to challenge yourself and how you interpret your own work is really, really important.
I think that ties in really nicely to, at the very end of Nikki's article, she writes a summary. And the first part of point 1 in her summary is be grounded in reality. Yeah. And what you're talking about there, that kind of reflection and considering what you're doing, is grounding yourself in reality. And by using user research, direct observations of users, then you're also grounding yourself in reality. And the last point in her summary as well is help solve actual problems users are having.
Yes.
And that as well ties in with what we've talked about in the first article, that sometimes the person you're communicating to, even internally, is the next step in your communication chain, and you have to understand the problems they are having, understanding what you're trying to communicate.
Oh, you said something hugely important there when you said communication chain. I mean, that's something we tend to forget because it's this whisper game. I don't know what would be the English term for it.
Chinese whispers is what we would normally call it when playing at school. Yeah.
Because that's what is always happening in all organizations. So you'd say something and someone else repeats it. But if they didn't understand what you said in the first place, when they repeat it, they're going to repeat it in a way that doesn't make sense to you if they would repeat it back to you. But that is going to be repeated by a third person to another person. And so that, again, makes you realize how hugely important it is that you actually check that the person you talked to understood what you said.
Yeah. Looping back, grounding what you're saying in reality.
Yeah.
If the other person at the other side isn't understanding you, then you're going to have a real hard trouble getting it any further down the road.
James, you've added a suggestion for recommended listening after this show. Episode 129, Beyond User Research with Lou Rosenfeld.
Yeah, that was actually from almost exactly 4 years ago. And we chatted to Lou. He was talking about going, like the title says, beyond user research and the importance of combining your research with other data points. So I actually chose this article before we talked about the articles, but it actually feels even more suitable to listen to.
It does. Yeah. Fantastic. And of course, the links to that show, to the articles, you'll find them online on uxpodcast.com.
And if you'd like to contribute to funding UX Podcast, then please visit uxpodcast.com/support.
Remember to keep moving.
See you on the other side.
So, James, have you noticed that spring is here?
Yeah, I've noticed that spring's finally arriving.
Yeah, I got so excited I wet my plants.
Oh, gosh. Oh, See, now the problem with that joke is I see the other meaning in my head. Or the play on words is what I see in my head, and that's unpleasant. And I know you've just bought a new chair.